What's up everyone, I'm Twisted. Arcane is over. As you know, the next animated show will not take place in Piltover and Zon and will instead focus on another region of Runeterra. In this video, I wanna talk about why I think this region will be Noxus and what my expectations and hopes are for a Noxian animated show. You probably heard that Riot is exploring other regions, the ones circulating online being Noxus, Ionia, Demacia and Bilgewater, but we also know that besides working on a new animated show with Fortiche, they're also working on a live action project and other games. So it's unlikely that all of these regions will have their own shows. From all the regions mentioned, I'm very confident that the next animated show will focus on Noxus. Arcane focused on Piltover and Zon, and the only other region to be spotlighted in the show in any significant way was Noxus. From Mel and Ambessa to the Black Rose subplot, the casual viewers of the show already have some familiarity with the region and its culture, so the jump from the Twin Cities to the Empire is much more digestible than, let's say, from Noxus to Freljord. Not only that, but from a production standpoint, the teams working on the show had to have some familiarity with the region as well, and have already done explorations when it comes to colors, shapes, characters, themes, etc. And this work can be used as a starting point for another show. And finally, the most obvious hint at Noxus being the focus of a new show is that one of Swain's ravens shows up in Season 2, with one of the final scenes focusing on the bird as it reveals its 3 eyes, and then later follows Mel as she returns home. To me, that's a very obvious teaser for an upcoming show. And the bird also shows up in the Arcane artbook on the last page, again another teaser. Before focusing on what this show could entail, I want to say that everything I'll mention in this video, from stories to my expectations, are based on the current lore of Noxus. As you may know, Arcane completely retconned the entire lore of Piltover and Zon, the characters in the show are completely new reimaginings of themselves, and the characters that aren't in the show, well, we don't know how much of their stories will remain unchanged. I can't confidently say that this will also happen to the Noxian stories, but I also can't say it won't. So please keep that in mind while watching this video. My context here is the current canon lore, but I don't know how much of it will remain canon. Also, I'm going to reference a lot of events without fully explaining them, so I'll leave links below to all the stories I read before making this video. So my initial idea for the show was actually for it to be a Noxian and Ionian show, one that explored the second invasion of Ionia, with some parts showing us the first invasion, kinda like what Arcane does in Season 1, where Act 1 takes place in the past before a time skip in Act 2. This was mostly because I really wanted new stories being told and the lore to move forward, but then the more I reread some of the stories, the more I felt like focusing on the first invasion could be more than enough. But then I read even more stories and realized something. Ionia is just not that important for Noxus. I know this might seem weird, but hear me out. The first invasion was ordered by Darkwill, which was the ruler of Noxus at the time, and he was under the influence of LeBlanc. As far as we know, he didn't just want Ionia. In fact, Noxus was expanding into Sharima and into Freljord as well, all because Darkwill wanted to find a way to extend his life, and because, well, that's what Noxus does. They expand, conquer, assimilate. Ionia is just another piece of land for them. Yes, they failed to conquer it, and they will try again, as we see hinted in a couple stories, but not necessarily because Ionia is special. Again, it's because that's what Noxus does. They conquer and expand and want every nation under the same banner. But then you look at Ionia, and the invasion is the most important event in their recent history. It completely turned the region upside down. Almost every single champion living in Ionia was massively impacted by the invasion in some way. So, while telling a Noxian story, Ionia isn't that important. When telling an Ionian story, Noxus is one of the most important elements. And this makes me believe that yes, a show that focuses on both regions could work, but we could also have a show that focuses on Noxus, where we do see the invasion but only some parts of it, and then later we get an Ionian one, where we see their perspective of the events and we really get a feel for how much they were impacted by the Noxians. So, while my initial idea for this video was to focus on a Noxus and Ionia show, I decided to only focus on Noxus and then tackle Ionia in another video. So now I want to talk about my expectations for the general story, how Arcane ties into it, and what my hopes for the teams and characters are. Personally, I think the most interesting story to tell is Swain's rise to power. I want him to be the protagonist of the show. He was a noble who started hearing rumors of the Black Rose, killed his parents and LeBlanc, or so he thought, gave up on his nobility to become a soldier, he fought in Ionia, the Black Rose manipulated things so that he would die there but he survived, he managed to find Rom, the demon of secrets, and outsmart him, then killed Darkwill, the leader of Noxus, and became the leader himself. As a soldier, he found where the strength of Noxus lies, in unity, in assimilation of other nations. Swain is someone that can't be controlled, can't be manipulated, because he truly believes in his vision of the Empire. He doesn't care how others see him, be it as a villain or not, all he cares about is this idea of strength through unity. Swain is a charismatic dictator, he's not some warlord blinded by greed and bloodlust. No, he truly believes that he's doing the best for the Empire. My hope is for the show to explore how Swain became like this, what made him believe in the Empire so much that he would turn away his life as a noble for it, how he started believing in this vision of the Empire as a soldier. We know how he is now, but I want to see how he became like this. I want to see his life as a noble and him slowly turning away from the ideals of Noxus at the time to the vision he has now. I would also love to see his meeting with Rom and how a mortal managed to outsmart an ancient demon and make a reverse Faustian bargain with it. And finally, see him rise to power and establish a new era for the Empire. This is what I would love to see happening in the show. As you may have realized, Ionia is indeed a part of this story, but it's not the focus. Now, before diving into other characters, I want to talk about Arcane. As I mentioned, in the show we see at least one of the demonic ravens. Now, this could just be Rom, before Swain made a deal with him, but I do believe both seasons take place after Swain kills Darkwill, and here's why. In season 1, we learn that a man killed Kino, Ambessa's son and Mel's brother. Ambessa says that this man doesn't believe the score is settled, and that he has more resources than them, the Medarda. Not a woman, not a mage, not a rose, Ambessa says it was a man. In season 2, it's easy to assume that the Black Rose was somehow involved, and that they might have been the ones to kill him, but I wouldn't be so sure.
Regrettably, his fate wasn't among your mother's lies.
You killed him. I gave Ambessa every opportunity to atone for her transgressions. She chose pride over progeny.
Notice how LeBlanc doesn't say yes here. She says she gave Ambessa an opportunity to atone. Later, Ambessa simply says that Kino was caught up in their web of lies.
Your brother was struck with curiosity. He got caught in their web and with every action grew more deeply entangled. So you let him die?
LeBlanc also says that Ambessa didn't lie. So yes, Kino was likely killed by a man, and I believe that man was Swain. Kino might have willingly sought out the rose, struck with curiosity as Ambessa says, but then Swain killed him when Kino found out about the Cabal, or perhaps Swain was aware of the mage child and killed Kino before he fell onto the rose's hands. Ambessa could have also been aware of all of this and willingly let Kino get killed by Swain so that the rose would think her mage child was dead.
I pray you never suffer the agony of being forced to forsake one child to save another.
I think it's likely that the Rose didn't get to find out if Kino was the mage or not.
At first it seemed plausible that he could have been the child. But then your mother led us to you.
But as Ambessa sought Mel, the Rose followed and they found the real mage child.
My son is dead. Is that not enough to sate your bloodlust? I haven't insulted your intelligence, Ambessa. Do not insult mine.
In this scene, Ambessa is playing dumb, but the Rose already knows the truth. This also explains why Ambessa puts the blame on the Rose and not on Swain. Swain killing Kino was something she let happen so that the Rose wouldn't get to Mel. And this failed attempt at fooling the Cabal might be what LeBlanc refers to when she mentions,
I gave Ambessa every opportunity to atone for her transgressions.
And yes, this is obviously LeBlanc. The gold eyes, gold marks beneath them, and Mel even calls her
Deceiver,
which is LeBlanc's title in League. So this does tie the story of Arcane with Swain, but we can go deeper. As I said, Swain exposed the Cabal before he became a soldier. This was part of their plan, but Swain didn't know. So you might assume that it was during this time that he killed Kino, but that's unlikely. Based on the work artists published online, we know that Mel's flashback takes place in Ionia. This isn't stated in the show, but in season 2 LeBlanc takes Mel to the same place again, and afterwards Mel returns to Piltover on a boat, and we can see some Ionians living in front of her. We also know that Ambessa banished Mel to Piltover about a decade before season 1, which means that the flashback and the invasion of Ionia took place at least a decade before the show, but looking at present Mel, it's possible it was even more than that. It's also implied that Kino's death happened recently, as his death was the reason for Ambessa to seek Mel, so it's more than likely that Swain killed him after he rose to power, and there's another clue that lines up with that. In season 2, we learned that Ambessa was stripped of her holdings. This might have been another reason why she sought Mel, but regardless, I believe her resources were taken away by Swain. We know that after Swain took control of Noxus, he reduced the influence of the noble houses in the empire, mostly because a lot of them were in cahoots with the Black Rose. Regardless if this included the Medarda or not, all noble houses were affected, and that would explain why Ambessa has less resources now. Another curious detail is that the way Swain's or Realm's powers work is by stealing the secrets of the dead. And if Swain did kill Kino, then everything he knew, every detail about his mother's past and the rose that he managed to find was now also known by Swain. This could explain why there's a raven following Mel, but perhaps the raven was just following LeBlanc and then started following Mel instead. That could also work. So, if the current timeline of events is still canon, it should look something like this. Now you might be wondering, if Arcane takes place after Swain's rise to power, then how does that tie into my idea for the show? Well, I did say I wanted to see Swain's past, which means we could see a younger Ambessa make an appearance. But in general, I have to admit that I'm being really reserved in this video, and only focusing on one specific era and in as few characters as possible. This is mostly to keep my expectations low for now, because we don't know how big the next show will be. If this show has many more episodes than Arcane, then sure, I could see many eras of Noxus being explored. Mordekaiser's reign, Darkwill's reign, present-day Noxus, hell, maybe even Noxus during the Rune Wars, since the visions LeBlanc showed Mel were probably of these wars. In fact, this is probably the same cataclysm that Rise experienced. I also feel like Arcane itself had a runtime too small for its large cast of characters, and there wasn't enough time for all the characters to really breathe and have their moments. If the Noxus show has more runtime than Arcane, then I can definitely see the cast of characters being bigger than the ones I mentioned here. If this is the case and the show is indeed bigger than Arcane, then perhaps we'll see more of Ambessa and Kino, and maybe even Mel finally returning to Noxus. However, I don't really know what her role in this story could be. I've seen people speculate she might become the Faceless, but I can't really see the dots connecting without starting what would essentially be fanfiction. I'm not saying it's impossible, it isn't, it's just not a creative exercise I want to do in this video, mostly because there are many other characters I want to discuss, some that I hope will be in the show, and some I hope will not. Speaking of which, let's talk about Singed. As you may know, the chemical weapons used by the Noxians in Ionia were created by Singed. Timeline-wise, this doesn't work as well anymore, unless Singed made the weapons before the events of the show, which would be a bit weird in my opinion. But even ignoring that, I think this will change in the show. Sure, the connection is cute, but making chemical weapons doesn't really do that much for Singed as a character. We already know he's a monster just from the experiments he did. And well, this Singed isn't exactly the mad chemist with a bottle of chemical gas behind his back now, is he? As for the weapons themselves, I have a feeling the writers will shy away from something like chemical weapons in favor of another type of weapon. I'm not too concerned though, because the specific weapon used doesn't change the story that much, be it fire or some crazy magic. As long as it devastates both the population and the land itself, the story can still work out for the most part. Assuming they still want to do something similar and not just having Noxian soldiers killing people and that's it. I hope they don't, I hope there is some devastating weapon involved, something that leaves long-lasting effects on the people and the environment, because that showcases how far the Noxians will go to achieve what they want. And it's also more traumatizing for the various characters. Yay. Most people that watch my videos aren't actually subscribed, so if you've watched this video so far, consider subscribing. It's free and you can always change your mind later. Now, for more characters I want to see, starting with Darius. Darius is the ideal Noxian soldier, one that lives solely for the Empire, solely for war and conquest. One who has sacrificed everything he could for the Empire and is now nothing without it. Darius, like Swain, believes that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts to a dehumanizing degree. Your life is only as valuable as how much it benefits the Empire. It's all about how much you can give, how much you can sacrifice. Noxians sell the idea that everyone is equal under the same banner and that no matter your background, you can become someone, which is true. We see that with Darius, who grew up poor and became a renowned soldier. But it's way more likely that you'll die in battle than actually climb the Imperial ladder. But Noxians want you to believe that you are doing the right thing, and Darius represents that. Here I'm hoping we get more of what we got in his comic. In it, we see that Darius once had a lover, and it's even implied that he had a son with her. She never told him, and after betraying the Empire, she was killed in front of him before he ever knew. Killed by someone who believes in Noxus like Darius does. In the comic, we also see that he was part of the Ionian campaign, and his lover had to have her arm amputated because of the chemical weapons. It was also because of the weapons that she eventually turned her back on the Empire. That probably won't be canon anymore, as I said, but I do hope they keep this part of his past present in some way. To be the hand of Noxus is to sacrifice everything, your life, your individuality, your love, for the greater good of the Empire. We also know that Darius spoke out against Swain being cast out of the military, so I hope we get to see more of their mutual respect for each other grow, and them eventually becoming rulers of Noxus together.
No daughters, only soldiers.
And if Darius is in, I expect Draven as well. Funny enough, Draven is far from the ideal soldier, as he's all about personal glory and recognition, individuality in an empire who's against that, which is something interesting to explore. Swain also wanted Draven to help him with his plans of killing Darkwill, maybe to later sway Darius to his side, but nonetheless I hope to see more of Swain and Draven's relationship.
You stood by me when I was outcast, so I stood by you when you were drunk. In spite of the stench.
Moving on to Mordekaiser. As much as I like him, I don't really want to see much of him in the show. I want him to be mentioned as a legend. I want to see statues of him, a warlord from a bygone era, but I don't want to see much of that era. Mostly because I feel like that story would be somewhat disconnected from most of the characters I expect. There aren't that many champions still alive tied to Mordekaiser, the only ones being LeBlanc and Vladimir, and I guess Veigar too. If the show is going to focus on modern Noxus, it's better for it to only show some glimpses and flashbacks of Mordekaiser's reign, just enough to give the audience the context needed and not much else. But if the show wants to give us an origin story for LeBlanc and really explore the past of her character, then sure, bring Mordekaiser in. However, if this is the case, then I don't think a simple flashback like in Arcane is enough. I feel like the show would need to commit and spend a significant amount of time on his story, and I don't know if that will happen, but then again that also depends on how much runtime the show will have. And since we're talking about the Iron Revenant, let's talk about the Deceiver. LeBlanc was once part of Mordekaiser's inner circle, until she helped the tribes defeat him and sealed him away. Since then, she has raised the secret cabal, erased her name from history, and manipulated things from the shadows. Each member of the Black Rose has its own personal agenda, though we don't quite know what LeBlanc's is. We know she probably wants to keep Mordekaiser sealed, or at least find a way to defeat him for good, but that's about it. LeBlanc is interesting to me because how there are basically two versions of her. Everyone that interacts with her or hears about her describes her as the Pale Woman, a mystery, a powerful and scary sorcerer, a master of illusion. But then we read stories from her perspective and we learn that while that's true, she's also just a sassy old woman, one who can't help but see Swain as a worthy foe, despite how much she hates that idea, and one who is also trying to make her legend seem greater than it actually is. I fear the writers will lean more on the former than the latter, but I think it would be really funny if this duality was still present. I don't mind her being serious, but I want some sass as well, a bit more than what we got in Arcane. She's a deceiver, so of course the idea people have of her and how she presents herself to others is never going to match who she really is. Speaking of which, she's a master of illusions. She has disguised and created so many versions of herself through the centuries that no one really knows who she is anymore. And I think it would be really cool if that also applied to her. Does she still know who she is? Why she's doing what she does? Is she even the real one or a clone? Does that matter? I would love to see this explored in the show. LeBlanc as someone with a fragmented history, fragmented identity, lies and truth so entangled no one can distinguish them. Not LeBlanc, not the other characters, not even the audience. Also, I know many people see Swain and the Black Rose as enemies, but truly, that's too black and white of a perspective. Swain knows the Rose plots against him, but he is willing to let them do their thing as long as it benefits his vision of the Empire. So, of course, if they do something that doesn't, he will intervene. I hope we get to see more of LeBlanc's relationship with Swain and how they are willing to let something slide as long as it benefits them both.
I suppose this makes us enemies with benefits.
And since we're talking about the Black Rose, might as well talk about its second most well-known member. Vladimir is an interesting one. I really like him simply because he's a man who is basically immortal, but despite having these godly powers, his mind is still human. And so, after living for centuries, the memories of his past lives slowly fade away and he tries to immortalize them in paintings. There are some parallels that could be made between Vladimir and LeBlanc, how their identities and how they perceive themselves has changed through the centuries. However, besides this connection, I don't really see how Vladimir could be part of the story based on the lore we have now. His backstory has way too many connections, from from Camavor to the Darkin Wars, I don't expect any of that, and his modern lore is just him coming out of the shadows and being part of history once again, being opposed to the Triferics and potentially betraying the Rose as well. I would love to see Vladimir being in the show, but if that's the case, I don't really have many expectations for his role in the story. I think a lot of what we would see of him would be brand new explorations of the character, and I'm all here for them. Moving on to a couple characters I don't expect. I think Cyan's place in Runeterra is a reminder of how far Noxus will go to achieve their goals. Cyan was a brutal soldier, the first hand of Noxus, and years after he and Jarvan the First killed each other, the Black Rose revived him and he was used by Darkwill, until he realized Cyan was too dangerous, so he was sealed again, and years later is now being used by Swain. Cyan is really not that interesting of a character, not before he dies nor post-resurrection, but his story shows how you can live and die by Noxian ideals, but Noxus itself will do whatever it can to exploit you, even after you die. Noxian tactics are unethical and brutal. Personally, I don't really care if Cyan shows up, but if he does, this is what I expect his role in the show will be in some way. If he does make it, I do hope he's explored further, because right now he's pretty bland. He was a brutal general before, and now he's a brutal monster, and that's it.
The echo of a soul. Only pain brings it back.
I know Katarina is a fan favorite, but given her current story, I don't expect her to be in the show if the focus will be on Swain's story, unless we're going to see a very young Katarina. Obviously the writers could just retcon her story, but I really hope that doesn't happen. In my opinion, Katarina's story, and by extension her father's and talents, is best told in a post-Darkwill Noxus. Katarina stands on the side of the Triferics, opposed to the rest of her family who plot against it alongside the Black Rose. If the show does focus on Swain after he became a ruler, then yes, Katarina being there makes absolute sense. But again, my hopes are that the show will tell the story of Swain rising to power and not much afterwards. So Katarina is not a character I expect. And the same applies to most of the youngest or newest Noxians like Annie, Samira, Briar and Rel. I see them as the newest generation, so it's going to take a while until we get to their stories, if ever. Another character I don't expect is Urgot. I know he has ties to Noxus and Swain, but the most important and interesting parts of his story don't take place in Noxus. If he appears in the show, it's probably going to be a younger Urgot. I wouldn't mind that, but again, the real meat of his story happens in Zon, and that region was already explored, so I don't really care much for his inclusion in a Noxian show. Some of you might have realized that I haven't talked about a very popular Noxian champion yet, that being Riven. That's because I think it makes more sense to talk about her in my Ionian video. I think an Ionian show is where Riven would shine the most, but of course I'm not opposed to seeing her in this hypothetical Noxian show. Perhaps we could see a bit of her as a commander in this show before she's fully explored in the next one. And that's it when it comes to champions, though obviously I expect other characters to be important in the show, be it characters we know like the Faceless, but also brand new characters created just for the show, like how Mel and Ambessa were created for Arcane. And obviously this could not be a show about Swain without a young Irelia being there to cut his arm, though as I said, I would rather there be a show solely dedicated to Ionia, so I wouldn't want or expect Irelia to be explored in an Noxian show. She's just an Ionian child who fought back and that's it. A character we know exists, but will only be explored later. So again, here's what I expect from the story. The main character would be Swain. Swain grows up in the nobility of Noxus, and alongside him we learn how corrupt they are. He slowly uncovers the mysterious cabal behind them, as well as rumors of a secret dark power lurking beneath the Immortal Bastion. Then Swain, without knowing he's being manipulated by said cabal, exposes it, killing his own parents and the mistress of the cabal herself, or so he thinks. Then his journey starts as a soldier of Noxus. Here is where he meets Darius for the first time. It's also during this journey that Swain realizes the strength of Noxus comes from unity, this being the first seed that would grow into his vision of the Empire. He also begins doubting the competence of the current Grand General. But then the first invasion of Ionia finally starts, and the Black Rose do what they can to assure that Swain dies there. Against all odds, he doesn't. On the brink of death, a raven gives him a vision. Dark secrets are revealed to him, and he now knows he has been nothing but a pawn of the Rose this whole time. Not only him, but the Grand General Dark Darkwill as well. Because of his injuries, Swain is cast out of the military. He ventures deep beneath the Immortal Bastion, where he finds the dark power his parents spoke of, the Demon of Secrets, Rom. The man outsmarts the demon, making a reverse Fastian bargain and gaining its powers. Under the Empire's nose, he begins plotting, seeking help from very specific individuals, including Draven, who was at his lowest at this point in his life. Years later, Swain confronts Darkwill and executes him, and so a new era for Noxus begins. This is what I would love to see in a Noxian show. Yes, this is all lore we know of, but we only know the gist of it, the most general and relevant parts. Think of how many plots and subplots could fit between each of these events, the conflicts, the drama, the dialogue, a story with no heroes, a story about sacrifice, twisted ideals, and a secret ancient cabal. I think there's potential here to elevate the stories we already know, without remaking them completely like Arcane did. To deeply explore the characters we are already familiar with, without remaking them completely for a wider audience. At least I hope so. As a final note, I know some of you are probably screaming in the comments saying they should put X champion in the show, which, hey, that's valid if you love that champion. But please, if you do believe a character should be in this hypothetical Noxian show, don't just say their name, tell me how they could fit into the themes and story I mentioned, or tell me of other themes or other stories that should be included and how your champion might fit into them. This video isn't me saying that Riot should do what I want because I'm right. No, this is me sharing my expectations and hopes for the show, and you're free to share yours in the comments. If you like this type of videos, consider subscribing. It's free and you can always change your mind later. I'm Twisted and I'll see you guys in the next one.